Hello, I'm Karen Moniz. I'm the Technical Director at ICCBA, and I'd like to welcome you to our second annual Ask ICCBA session. Couple of things in the background here. What is ICCBA? If you're tuning into us, you have some idea, but we are an international nonprofit, non-state actor, totally supported by user fees. We have a small footprint here in Southern California. Hundreds of volunteers around the globe help us with our mission. We are a standards development organization. We maintain and develop the ISBT 128 standard for medical products of human origin. It provides globally unique donation identification, harmonized terminology, again, something that we could not do without our hundreds of volunteers on our technical advisory groups. We have standards for labeling these products and the electronic transfer of information about these products. I'd like to thank all of you who submitted questions ahead of time and those who will submit questions during the session. We've also pulled some questions from our help desk to help get us started after we go through the pre-submitted questions. At the top right-hand portion of your screen, you're going to see something that says Live Stage. You'll see a toggle on the top right-hand side. You'll need to open that and acknowledge, yes, you can use my name, just acknowledge that down at the bottom. And then you're going to get all these little wavy hands that say, welcome to the chat. We're monitoring the Q&A tab, so make sure that you switch immediately to the Q&A tab if you want to submit a question. We'll have Betty Perez, team member in the background, monitoring the chat, just in case anybody forgets, to remind you to please put your questions in the Q&A. That's how we're capturing questions for the written summary at the end and all of that. Okay, so I'm going to briefly name everybody. They can wave at you, and then we'll get started. And I'm just going to go around my screen. I'm not sure if it's in the same order for everybody. We have Alex Garlitz, who is going to be our moderator. He's going to be the one asking all the questions. He's one of our information standards specialists. We have Monica Freri, who is our standards documentation manager. Robin Wilkinson, who joined us over a year ago now as our deputy technical director. Erwin Cabana, who has been here since the beginning of time. He's the technical manager. If I have questions about the standards, Erwin is who I ask. We have Ryan Reese, also an information standards specialist. And I'm going to introduce Kayla Lash. She's one of the newer additions to our team. And she's going to tell us a little bit about herself and then turn it over to Alex. And I'm looking at my list, and I think I said everything, except a quick reminder to please ask your questions in the Q&A channel. Thanks.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla Perez, and I am the new education specialist here at ICCBA. I joined ICCBA in October of 2024, and so far I've really enjoyed getting to take my passion for education in order to enhance and develop more ICCBA's educational initiatives, because education of the ISBT 128 standard is at the heart of ICCBA's mission. In fact, one initiative I'm really excited to be able to share with everyone today is that we're in the beginning stages of developing an ISBT 128 global education program that's designed to provide users and vendors of ISBT 128 with comprehensive training modules and resources that will provide implementation assistance to ensure a much smoother adoption and a consistent application of this standard across the globe. And eventually, our goal for participants who complete the modules in this training program will be able to receive an official ISBT 128 acknowledgement of completion. So I'm very excited to be here today and hear your questions throughout today's webinar, because I think it will provide invaluable insight into areas that ICCBA can further address in our upcoming global education program. And additionally, we would love to hear your ideas or suggestions on what areas of this standard that you feel should be the priority in the development of those modules. So going forward, I'm going to hand it over to Alex Garlitz.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Kayla. Glad to have you on the team. Hello again, everybody. My name is Alex, and I'm going to be moderating this webinar for us. So I'm going to be taking over the reins at this point here, and I'm going to be presenting the questions that we have currently, and we are going to be answering those questions as a panel. Karen mentioned this earlier when she was on stage and giving her opening chat to this webinar, but if you do have any questions while we are answering some of these preset questions, please do submit them inside the Q&A section of the chat. You'll find that within the live stage on the right-hand side. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to transition us into our first question that we have. And that is, we are currently implementing the ISBT 128 standard and would like to clarify how to include additional data within the data matrix symbol. According to ICCBA guidelines, specific data identifiers must be used before each data structure, such as equals for the donation identification number, equals % for blood group, and equals less than for the product code. As an example, if we wanted to include the patient's name inside the data matrix, which data identifier would be appropriate? So I'm going to go ahead and pass this first question off to Erwin. If you could please provide us with your guidance.
Thank you. So first of all, if you want to encode multiple data structures within that data matrix symbol, you're going to have to first start it off with the compound message data structure. So within our standard, that's data structure 023, and that in itself has its own set of data identifiers, which is equals plus. And then within that data structure, you have to specify how many subsequent data structures you're trying to encode. So for example, this user asked about the DIN, blood groups, and product code. So that's 3. So you would indicate there's 3 additional data structures following this, and then you would go ahead and encode those in sequence, all of the data structures with their data identifiers. And then there's this additional question here that they wanted to put the patient's name in there. So one of the rules for encoding ISBT 128 compound message is you can only use ISBT 128 data structures within that compound message. So there isn't a specific ISBT 128 data structure for patient name, but there is one for patient identification number. So you can encode the patient identification number in there, and that's data structure 025, and then it's within our technical specification. When you go to section 2.4.25, it'll define the specs for that data structure for patient identification number, and there you'll find that the data identifier is ampersand hashtag or ampersand pound, depends on what generation you're from, you can call it. And so I think the question was which data identifier would be appropriate. So it's not necessarily the patient name, but for the patient identification number, the data identifier would be the ampersand pound. And then you'd follow the specs on encoding the patient identification number as far as the length and all the characters allowed for it. But to answer the question directly, we don't have a data structure for the patient name, but the closest best thing would probably be the patient identification number.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Thank you very much, Erwin. So one thing that I did forget to mention to our viewers here is that we will be sending out a list of the questions that have been submitted to us. We're going to be doing our very best to answer each of these questions within this webinar here. However, if we don't get to a question that you submit within this scheduled time frame, please don't fret. We will get around to answering it, and we will be providing that summary at a later date following this webinar. All right, so with that being said, I'm going to transition us into our next question, and this one is a two-parter. So to begin, I'd like to ask about the process not only for requesting a new product code, but also a different size and potentially format for the product label. We are working with a vendor on a new spray dried plasma product, and the size of the vendor container label is 3.25 inches by 4 inches versus the standardized 4 by 4 inches. So again, this is going to be a two-parter. So I'm going to ask Ryan, if you could please address the first part of this question. What is the process for requesting a new product code?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's two ways, right? The first way is if you're using existing ISBT 128 terminology, you can use the ISBT product lookup program. This is on our website. If you are on the webpage, you see that red ribbon that runs across the page. On the far right is the lookup tools. You'll hover over that. You'll see product lookup program. That's a quick way to navigate to it. there, using existing terminology, you can build a product description that fits your needs. If an existing product description is available, then great, it'll show it, an exact match will appear. If not, a blue submission button will appear for you to go ahead and add that to your list and submit it to our technical team. So that's the first way. But if the terminology that we already have does not fit your needs, you can always shoot us an email to support@isbt128.org. And that email will go to the technical staff for us to review the terminology and discuss it internally, and then reaching out to you for further clarification of the product and so on. So if that terminology does not exist, so you can use a lookup program. If the terminology doesn't exist, you can reach out to us. You can also just email us directly. Say you can't get to the tool, or the tool is not cooperating with you. You could just shoot us an email. We'll be happy to reach out to you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Ryan. And to transition into this second portion of this question, I'd like to bring this over to Robin. So Robin, can you please cover the minimum labeling requirements for blood products?
Sure. So each type of MPHO, medical product of human origin, actually has its own minimum requirements to be on the label. But specifically to blood products, you can look at section 4.5.1 of ST005, which is a standardized labeling of blood components. Every ISBT 128 label should carry an electronically readable donation identification number, or DIN, and a product code. If you are using linear barcodes and both of those cannot fit, then you must use you must have the DIN in a barcode. Every ISBT 128 label must also carry the text of the DIN and the text of the product code. And then there's also requirements in that section of ST005 that talk about accompanying documentation and what belongs in the accompanying documentation. We also want to suggest, I know we just talked about Erwin talked about the 2D matrix symbol. That symbol carries much more data than a linear barcode. So you may want to consider using the 2D matrix on a smaller label.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Robin. I just want to remind our panel members as well, if you do have any little interesting tidbits to add or personal experiences, please feel free to jump in and add to the conversation. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next question. And this one is in regards to facility identification numbers. So the question is, our organization has multiple FINs, or facility identification numbers, assigned to us, and we would like to merge them all into a singular FIN. Which steps do we need to take with ICCBA in order for that to happen? Erwin, if you wouldn't mind, could you please provide your guidance on this one as well?
You'd have to first reach out to ICCBA to notify us of your intentions. And typically what we'll do, because you already own those FINs, and it was only a one-time payment which you've already made to own that FIN. It's already yours. We actually encourage you to keep the FIN. You don't have to use it to make them active. And your annual license fees is still based on the same cumulative activity across all those FINs. So if that FIN just is dormant and so there's no activity with it, it's not increasing your annual invoice any at all just to own those. However, there are some users that are insistent that they just don't want anything to do with these old FINs. Yes, we can retire them and get rid of it, but we do encourage to just keep them and just use them, because down the road, you may want to use them later on. Say you have a separate department doing different types of collections. If you're only collecting blood, now you're collecting for cell therapy as well. That's one way to help manage and keep track of things. So there are benefits to keeping it. But if you do want to merge or into a single FIN, we don't merge FINs. We would ask you which one you'd like to keep, and then we would retire the rest of them. And then if any of them required name change, because say there's a merger between two organizations and you want to get them all together, there is a form that you'd have to fill out, and you'd reach out to us, again, letting us know your intentions, and then we'd send you out this form. I believe it's FM30. It's a facility name change form, and you fill out the forms and would coordinate back and forth to make sure that all the names are merged into the same ones for all corresponding fins. But if you just want one fin and you don't want anything else, the way we handle it is we ask you which one you want, and then we retire all of them. The alternative is we retire all of them and then issue a brand new one, and that requires submitting a brand new registration and paying the fees for processing the registration, and we can issue a brand new fin. There's also an inactivation form that we'd probably send you for all those other ones, and I believe that's FM 061. But our accounting department would be the ones handling that, and you would coordinate with them in those instances, and they'll send you the appropriate forms to fill out, and then we'll get that sorted out. But just know that there are benefits to keeping it, but you do have the option, and you can do either or a combination of both.
Awesome. Thank you again, Erwin. I'm going to move on to our next question here, and that is in regard to product description code divisions. So the question is when a red blood cell unit is divided using an open system, does its product code need to change? For example, if an RBC unit with the product code E0336 is split into two aliquots, AO and BO, should the product code change to E0326 to reflect the open system division, or can the aliquots retain the original product code E0336 while being labeled as divisions? And it's going to feel like I'm picking on you, Erwin, but I'm going to pass this one back over to you as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thanks. So for this particular instance, it's asking about the open system. So I want to address that first, but then I'll kind of address it in a more broad perspective. But if you go from a closed system into an open system, that does need to be reflected in the product description, hence this product description code. So there is an open attribute to indicate an open system from the closed system. And so because it's a different product description that has a different or an additional attribute of open, it does need a new product description code and needs to be relabeled to reflect that. So that's the answer to that specific question. And more in general though, PDCs should reflect the current status of the product. With some exceptions. So it's not just if it's open system. If you do any other sort of modifications, significant modifications, you need to reflect that in the product description and with the appropriate attribute. Hence, it's going to then get a new product description, corresponding product description code to reflect those new additional attributes reflecting those modifications. I did mention that there are some exceptions. And it depends on your national regulatory authorities if it allows it as well. But some will allow, like, for example, thawing a product. If all you do is thaw, for example, a fresh frozen plasma product, and you transfuse it before it expires, and that's the only thing that happens, it was thawed. There are some exceptions where some regulatory agencies will not require you to relabel it as a thawed product. You can just transfuse it. However, if you thaw it and then perform additional modifications, like you want to thaw an aliquot or you want to thaw and wash, then you're performing these additional modifications, then those need to be reflected and in the product description, hence a new product description code as well, and be relabeled as such.
Awesome. Appreciate it, Erwin. Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next preset question here. And this one is relative to our product description code lookup tool. So the question is we will be thawing fresh frozen plasma in cryo and would like to verify that we have selected the correct corresponding thawed E-codes. Is there an easy way to verify what these corresponding codes are? And I'm going to pass this one over to Ryan this time. Ryan, could you please provide your expertise on this question?
Yeah, absolutely. So using the lookup program really, you use it kind of to build what you think best fits your product description for the modified product. But it doesn't have like, these codes don't have like a one-to-one relationship, right? So we can't create a system that links the starting code to the finished code. So in that aspect, it's always best to, when building these product descriptions and understanding the modifications that occurred, to then also reference standardized ST002, which is our ISBT 128 standardized terminology document, to then and use that section, the specific section of the document, to then reference to see which modifier or attribute value best fits that product adjustment. But because we don't have a link to kind of just tell you this one, goes to that one, this one goes to that one, you can always reach out to us, right? And so you can always email our support team, and we'll be able to, and we do this all the time, be happy to, like, you could send us a list of codes, like, hey, Ryan, or hey, Alex, what's the thawed code for this one? Or Ryan, I have this one paired up. I think this is a thawed one. Is this correct? And we'll go ahead and review it and provide feedback. And if it is correct, absolutely perfect. We'll send that back to you. But if it's not, we'll provide our suggestions and kind of go from there.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ryan. Okay, so we're going to move on to one of our live questions that we received. And this question is as follows. So for ISBT 128 identifiers, such as the COI ID or the DIN, a check character is used to verify human-entered identifiers. When an identifier is transferred digitally through a barcode or digital integration, can the check character also be transferred similar to when it is entered by a human? The current standard does not include the check character in the digital encoding. Based on the standard, every system that receives ISBT identifiers needs to generate the check character before displaying or printing the identifier, which poses significant implementation burden on systems that only need to receive and display/print ISBT 128 identifiers, such as the ERP, MES, or label management system. Okay. So, Robin, I realize it's a rather long question, but if you could please provide your guidance, we would greatly appreciate it.
Sure, that's a great question. So, as the question states, the check character is used for manual entry. It is not meant to be part of the DIN, so therefore it should not be transmitted as part of the DIN. My understanding as a ex-software developer is that the calculating the check character is really a few lines of code. So hopefully it's not that burdensome to implement that. The reason we really suggest that it not be transmitted is that it really is a safeguard for manual entry. You want to make sure that you've got that correct DIN in there, that it's typed in properly, and that it's printed properly. I'd welcome anybody else's input on that.
So there are a number of data structures that in one of our reference tables, we list which data structures require a check character for it to be accompanied. And the COI is one of them, the DIN is another one. But specifically with the DIN, there is a mechanism for encoding the check character as well, and that's via the flag characters. Flag characters are it's a extra feature and primarily used for process control, but in our specifications, we define type 1, type 2, and type 3 flag characters. Type 1 flag characters are preset values that we define for internationally. Type 2 flag characters are a range of flag character values that are locally defined, so each facility can assign their own. And then we always have this range, what we refer to as a type 3 flag characters, where it assigns, there's a value, an actual value assigned to each check character. So, and again, there's another reference table that assigns the values for each check character, like an A equals this value, B is Z is this, asterisk is this. And so in order to, if you wanted to encode that digitally, you would put the corresponding value of that check character into the flag character, and which the flag character for the DIN, again, this is specifically with the DIN, you would encode that value in the DIN data structure. And just a quick reminder, the DIN data structure includes the DIN itself, the 13-character DIN, and then there's also 2 flag character values that's encoded in there. And flag characters are not part of the DIN, but it's encoded in the DIN data structure. So you would use one of the corresponding values that's assigned to that check character as a type 3 flag character. That same mechanism isn't allowed or specified with the COI ID or the other data structures that have check characters. That one was in particularly just with the DIN.
Thank you, Erwin.
Yeah, and I was going to just call that out, Erwin, that detailed explanation about flag characters applies only to the DIN, not to the chain of identity identifier or the other multiple data structures that require the use of a check character.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to move us on forward to our next question, and we got this submitted recently. So, can facilities use blank space on labels, particularly the lower left quadrant, for facility designated over labels to emphasize manufacturing location or symbols? What, if any, modifications are allowed in unused label spaces? So I think the gist of that one is, can additional information be added to blank spaces on an ISBT 128 label? So I'm going to open that one up to our panel. If somebody would like to jump on this one.
So typically, we don't. So within the ISBT 128 standard, with our labeling standard, we have designated locations for specific types of information in each of the quadrants, assuming it's a blood product. So we have your upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right. And so this question was asking about the lower left. And in general, we say that we don't preclude the addition of other information on the label as long as it doesn't obscure or cover up any of the required information that's on there. I just want to remind everybody also that there's the ISBT 128 requirements, but then there's also regulatory or national requirements as well, or accreditation requirements in addition to ISBT 128 requirements. So you do have to also follow your local regulations to see if that's allowed to be placed on the label in whatever position. But as far as an ISBT 128 perspective itself, the standard doesn't preclude users from adding additional non-standard information on the label as long as it doesn't obscure the other required information. And you may have to verify whatever it is that you're trying to put is acceptable with your local or accrediting requirements.
Awesome. Thank you, Erwin. You've been quite vocal during this webinar. We really appreciate it. I'm going to move us on to this next question here. So this is another recently submitted question, and it is as follows. How are product codes for such products such as exosomes and other 351 351 products, as well as non-traditional 351 products generated? If you could explain that process, we would greatly appreciate it. So I'm going to pass this one over to Karen, please. Karen, if you wouldn't mind providing your expertise and guidance.
Sure. Okay. As you all know, ICCBA and the ISBT 128 standards started in the mid-1990s in blood. Since that time, we've expanded to many other medical products of human origin. We've been coding in cellular therapy for 20 years. CTCLAG, one of our tags, is about to celebrate their 20th, I think, anniversary. So that we continue to evolve the standard. You're hitting on a new area in exosomes. We have actually been actively collaborating with the ISCT and ISEV to begin the first phase for this new area. Recognize that it is a medical product of human origin, that it does traceability from point of origin to point of use is critical. And we are working together with these other external groups to harmonize the terminology. That is our first step. So if it's a brand new area, reach out to our help desk. And that's how this initiative started, was somebody said, hey, do you guys have coding for exosomes? And we're like, not yet. And so we started this initiative with several other external organizations. After taking it through our cell therapy technical advisory group, and he said, we need to make sure that we pull in the right set of folks. So we actually had a live meeting at ISCT, and we're continuing to do things through an asynchronous forum. So hopefully we'll have coding or at least harmonized terminology out for that area. Now, for other things, take a look at ST002, and we'll give you a document with all the links, or you can go to our website, Technical Library, and look in an area that you think closely matches. look at what coding we have available there. So Ryan explained about the product code lookup tool. And if you have a really good idea of what you want to begin with, you can use that to look things up. But if you just want to get grounded in what terminology is available, go to ST002, look in the appropriate section for your medical product of human origin, and start drilling down from there. Then you can use some of those terms to help you with the product code lookup tools, see if there's something there. And if there's not, click the button, ask for a new code. New codes that are simply recombinations of existing approved terminology, they don't take too long and to get to you. We publish the product code database approximately once a month, sometimes more often. And so that happens. If it is a new class name, that new upper level class name, that does take time. We need to vet that through our sometimes multiple technical advisory groups and our standards committee. In the meantime, we have local codes that you can use. So if you're already using the ISBT 128 labeling format, you can back up to a local code. Our help desk will help you determine, what's the wait time, what might it be, and then help you determine whether or not you may want to use a local code. And I'm going to defer to my colleagues on the help desk to see if I've made any significant omissions in my answer or if they have anything else to add.
Seems like you hit the nail on the head right there, Karen. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks. All right, so we're roughly about halfway through our webinar here, so I just want to remind everybody in attendance that you can submit live questions into our Q&A section. So for those who may have come in a little bit late and missed that explanation, if you navigate to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a live stage option. You'll want to click on that, and you want to allow that to open up the chat, and then you'll be able to submit any questions that you have within that Q&A session. Again, if we don't get to your question today, we will be answering it via a summary that we will be providing at a short time after, at a later date of this webinar. But with that being said, thanks for everybody who has submitted their questions. I'm going to move us on to our next question to keep us chugging along here. So this one is relative to relabeling of products. And the question is, what should I do if I receive a product labeled with ISBT 128, but it contains errors on the label? So for this one, I'm going to go back to Erwin, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So you receive a unit and you notice something's wrong with it. I think the first thing you really need to do is notify the supplier, because if depending on the type of error it is, say it's something in their name or some standard type of information, it's likely that all their units are being labeled incorrectly that way, and you're just one of their customers, so they're sending it out to all their customers in error. So I think the first thing you want to do is notify the supplier of the error and let them know what's going on. There's the other part where people also wonder, well, should I relabel it so it's correct? And that depends, because there are depending on your national regulatory requirements, if that's allowed to be relabeled, because there are certain parts of the label where you're not allowed to relabel it if you weren't the facility that did the initial labeling on some portions of the label. So again, this is a general question. So I don't know what type of error it is, but just be mindful that depending on what it is, for example, if it's a product code and you're going to modify it, well, it's going to be relabeled anyways because you're going to put the new product code on there. But say it's other information like test results information, things like that. Some regulators don't allow another facility to relabel it unless you were the facility who actually received and verified those test results information. So I guess in summary, it's notify the supplier and also follow up on national relabeling requirements if it's allowed for you as a customer to relabel certain parts of the label that's incorrect.
Awesome. Thank you for that very much, Erwin. Continuing along here, we're going to move on to 2D labeling. Our facility is implementing ISBT 128 and would like to know if ICCBA provides ISBT 128 barcodes, specifically to 2D labeling. But I'm going to go ahead and transition this one over to Ryan. Ryan, if you could please give us some barcode guidance, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, we don't provide barcodes. We don't provide printed barcodes. What we provide is guidance on the ISBT 128 standard. Now, we do have a vendor lookup tool. So it's all registered vendors for the use of ISBT 128. Again, if you're on our web page, that red bar that runs across the lookup programs on the far right, you hover over that, gives you the vendor lookup tool. One of the options, you click on that, and and there gives you multiple ways to kind of modify the program. One of which you can search for a specific MPHO type, blood cell therapy and so on, or even get into specifics about the type of function or what you need. What are you looking for? And then even the regions that they serve. Now, right now that tool is currently on our website, but there is a new version coming soon. I think some of our technical members here are working on it in the back end, trying to get it ready for possibly go live at the end of this year or so on. But that's being ambitious. Sorry, I'd be a little ambitious, but we that's where you would want to go and search for any vendors that provide labels. And if you ever need, if you say you get a label and you want to just verify it, you can always contact us and we can, send us an example. And I can proofread it for you, go through it and provide any findings or let you know how great it is. And but the vendor lookup tool is where you'll find vendors who provide either 2D label examples or linear barcodes.
Awesome, Ryan. Love to hear it. Thank you, sir. We are going to move on to our next question here, and this one is relative to help desk support. Specifically, we have a user who states that they are from Latin America and they need assistance with ISBT 128, and they would like to know how can they best receive support. So I'm going to pass this one over to Monica. We haven't heard from you too much today. Could you please provide your guidance on this specific question?
Of course. So we are happy to report that we can provide assistance in Spanish during the registration and implementation processes, as well as technical support as needed. Additionally, we also can provide non-official translation of documents if necessary. It is also important to mention that facilities can translate ISBT 128 documents into other languages without ICCBA's written permission. However, the translations should indicate that they are from an ICCBA copyrighted document, and also that ICCBA is not responsible for the accuracy of the translation. Thank you.
Good stuff, Monica. Love it. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to push us over into our next question here. We have roughly about 20 minutes left in our scheduled time, so we're going to keep chugging along. And this question is specific to product pooling. So should the collection date for a pooled product be the pooling date and time or the earliest individual collection date and time? So for this one, I'm going to transition over to our resident blood banker and Karen. And if you could provide your guidance on this one for us, we would appreciate it.
Yeah. The collection date for any pooled product will always stay the collection date of the earliest product in that pool. It doesn't change when the first item in that pool was collected. So the collection date and time always stays with the original.
Perfect. Short and sweet. Love it. Thank you, Karen. All right. So I'm going to navigate us over to our next question here. And this one is going to be a two-parter. It's a live question and one of our preset questions. Mm-hmm. So to begin, for CAR-T clinical trials, is ISBT 128 labeling required? If so, should the product manufacturer create the label, or is that the responsibility of the collector? And the second part of this question is, what is the purpose of the chain of identity identifier, and what FIN should be used in a DIN for a cellular therapy product collected for further manufacturing? So two very similar questions here. Karen, I'm going to go back to you if you wouldn't mind. Could you please provide us some guidance on these?
Okay, so when I saw this live question come in, I thought this looks just like, it dovetails nicely with the question that was pre-submitted. So is ISBT 128 labeling required? Okay, we are a standards development organization. We work with our international volunteers to help us create the standard, which enables all of this labeling and electronic data transfer. We are not an accrediting association, nor are we a regulatory agent, competent authority. So the requirement to utilize ISBT 128, okay, we like to think that you'll do it because it's the right and good thing to do. All right, we know that that's not how a lot of things operate. Okay, so there are accrediting agencies that require the use of the standard. There are regulatory agencies around the world that require the use of the standard. So is it required or not for a particular type of clinical trial? That's not a question ICCBA can answer. What we can do is we can provide a mechanism with which to accurately label and trace these products. Okay. Who does what when? That's why I wanted to tie this in with the chain of identity identifier question. Several years ago, with the increase in the complexity of further cellular therapy manufacturing, it was determined that we needed a new identifier because the DIN accurately labels each donation event. But sometimes you needed more than one product in order to create a final drug product. Okay, so we working with the standards coordinating body and several other external groups, lots of input from industry, the chain of identity identifier was created. Okay, so that is used then as a master case file number, kind of to link everything that goes into that. We actually did a webinar on chain of identity identifier, so you can go back through our website and take a look at that entire hour-long webinar on COI to get more information. But the key here is the agreement between the parties. Who does what when? We understand that workflows are different companies, different agencies. The key thing is that you work with everybody in your supply chain to determine who is going to issue the chain of identity identifier. You have to be registered with ICCBA in order to issue one. The FIN, the facility identification number, is key to this identifier. You should never use somebody else's FIN. So if you're a manufacturer and you've got a university doing your collection, they will assign the DIN. That's predetermined. They will assign the DIN. They will label the starting material, hopefully using standard 18, which provides basic ISBT 128 information on one side of the label and some more manufacturer-specific information on the right-hand side of the label. Okay, the COI identifier can come from anybody in the process, but it needs to be predetermined who is going to issue it, because that same COI identifier for this treatment arc, this given therapy for a patient-specific product, needs to be applied to every product that's going into that final product. Now, the ISBT 128 standard does not cover final drug product labeling. That comes through the pharmacy regulations. Okay, what we have seen a lot of pharma companies doing is including the chain of identity identifier as a piece of that element. These regulations vary by country, so you need to know what country you're in and what standards you're applying to your final drug product label. And it is perfectly acceptable. In fact, we encourage using the chain of identity identifier that's been used throughout the whole life cycle of the process on this end product. Because as a patient, if I go in and I donate my own cells and they tell me, hey, this is your number for this treatment, okay, and it's comforting to me, right? It's more than just comfort. It's important to safety. I know that that's my number. Now, not all patients are that aware, but you want to see that number used from the beginning to the end. That's what it was designed for. But who does what when? You need to work that out ahead of time and never use anybody else's FIN.
Great points there, Karen. Thank you so much. All right, so we have about 15 more minutes of our webinar here, so I'm going to keep us going. We're going to try and get through as many of these questions as we can. Again, if we don't get to your question, we will be answering it in a summary that we provide at a later time. So, continuing on here, we're going to be talking about ABO labeling next. So if my facility is processing NK cells from umbilical cord blood, do we have to use the donor's ABO typing information on the product identification label? And I'm actually going to pass this one over to Robin. Robin, if you wouldn't mind providing your guidance on this for us.
Sure. So this comes from the cellular therapy realm of MPHO. And this applies to all cellular therapy products. ABO is only needed when the product contains red cells. So since NK cells are extensively manipulated and they do not contain red cells, the ABO is not needed on that label.
Love it. Short and sweet. Thank you, Robin. All right. So next question that we have is going to be relative to the labeling format. And this is, what should a facility do if the intended recipient name is too long to display on the bag label? And I'm going to go back to Erwin on this one. It's been at least 5 minutes since we've heard from you. So if you could please jump back in here and give us your guidance, we would appreciate it.
You're going to have to, again, I'm going to have to refer to national regulatory requirements, because within the ISBT 128 standard, it's international standard, so it has to accommodate everybody, but there are going to be some national restrictions. And all our standard says, for example, is you put the patient's name on there or the intended recipient's name. But say, okay, in this instance, it doesn't fit. You have to see if what your national regulatory requirements allow for, like any abbreviations, or maybe just the first initial period, then the last name with it, or any other sort of combination of abbreviations. We don't get into that detail of what you're allowed to do as far as shortening the name, because there are regulations that, and again, regulations supersede ISBT 128 standard requirements. And the intended recipient name is something that is critical information. So you'd have to see if what you're allowed to do with regards to that name. Things that I've heard other facilities do is decrease the font size, for example, trying to get that to fit. But I understand you could only decrease it so much before it becomes illegible. Or you may be able to wrap it on a second line as well. But I can't really say, give you a definitive answer on how to handle it, because it does also depend on what's allowed in your national regulations.
All right. Thank you very much, Erwin. Okay, we are going to move on to our next question here. We have roughly about 10 or so minutes, so we're going to continue on here. I'm going to move on to a question that we received relative to accounting. So the question is, as I tried to make a payment online, but I received an error. So I imagine they would like to know why they received that error. So Kayla, if you could please provide your guidance and help on this, we would love to hear from you.
Yes. When talking with the accounting department, if you are receiving an error or invalid when you try submitting your credit card payment online, it could be the following reasons. So it could be not using Google Chrome, maybe trying a different browser. Additionally, a firewall could be preventing you from accessing the page. PayJunction has its own restrictions, so some countries may be blocked. And if you still wish to make a credit card payment online, please do contact us so that we may provide you with a credit card form for internal processing.
Awesome. Thank you, Kayla. Okay, we are going to move on to our next question here. And this one is another one of our live questions. So our facility made an annual payment to ICCBA, but activity report was not required to accompany the payment. Is this still necessary? So I'm going to open this one up to our panel, if anybody would like to jump in here.
Okay, I'm going to say yes. Okay, the payment is processed separately from your annual report. Okay, so they're not going to be submitted simultaneously, especially if you go online and make a credit card payment. We need your annual report. We need to know the volume. We actually have to report how many unique identifiers are issued. We're an issuing agency. There are regulatory requirements for us in that role. And so we need to know the volume that you're doing with your annual report. We need to know, are you using the chain of identity identifier or not? There's a couple things there. It helps us understand the depth, breadth, and scope of the ISBT 128 implementation. So if you have not yet submitted your annual report for 2024, we would love to have you submit it. Even if you've already paid your annual payment for the year, we'd love to have it. In fact, Robin and I are presenting data at both ASFA and at ISCT about the progress of the chain of identity identifier. So especially if you're using that, please send us your annual report so we know that you're using it.
Absolutely. I second exactly that. Please send us that information. All right. So we're towards the tail end here, but we're going to try and squeeze in a few more questions before we have to wrap up. So I'm going to move us on to this question here in regards to our product description code lookup tool. So how can one find the appropriate product codes for specific GMP products? And Ryan, I'm going to bring you up off the bench and ask for you to provide your guidance on this, please.
Yeah, happy to jump in. So I think I kind of answered this question earlier, right? So when using the lookup program, it's best to, you're trying to you provide some modifications to your product. It's best to also reference ST002 so that you can see which attributes group or which attribute values best used to describe your product, and from there, kind of select those within the program to then build that product. But with that being said, it's something I wanted to provide some clarity to, because I know this is something we get often. Is what is the format for these product descriptions, right? And how does this terminology then apply to the structure? If you look within ST002, like for instance, for blood, we have it's set up in this structure with classes. We identify the modifiers, attribute groups, and attribute values. That flow is as follows within the lookup tool as well. So you can kind of follow that flow when building your product description. First, select a class, modifier, attribute groups, and then attribute values. Same thing, and then for cell therapy, class, and then attribute groups, attribute values. It is important for those two specific attribute groups, or for those two specific MPHO types, that core conditions, it must be selected and identified. But so if you're looking for the correct product description, you would just reference ST002. If you're unsure, if you think you nailed it, but you just want it just to verify, shoot us an email. Be happy to look it over for you.
Absolutely. All right, Ryan, thank you so much for that. Okay, so we are going to have time for roughly about one more question here. So let's go ahead and transition into that. And this is going to be specific to our data structures. This is a question that we have come up relatively often, but in the various data structures that utilize characters representing a century marker, what is the proper way to encode the century value C? Now I'm going to go over to Erwin here to wrap up our final question, if you wouldn't mind.
So we have various data structures where you have to encode the year in there. So for example, there's an expiration date data structure, expiration date and time, collection date and time, production date and time. And all those use a similar format for encoding the year into that data structure. And that format in our specification is CYY. And the C is supposed to represent the century, and then YY is a year. And we've had some people get confused because it says shall specify the century of the year. So right now we're 2025. So that's people look at that as a 21st century, right? But the way it was intended and the way it's actually being used and practiced and encoded is that if you take the year, for example, to the year now 2025, you would just drop off the millennium, the 2, and you would just encode the 0 to 5 to represent 2025 as a year in there. I understand it is a little bit ambiguous, and we've discussed internally in the past about clarifying the language in our specifications, and probably even adding an example to help make it clear. Just as I explained, for example, with an example, 2025 shall be encoded as 025 versus the 21st century having that 1 being 125. The correct way for 2025 is be 025. And how I explain it is you just drop off that first number, the millennial number.
All right, you bet. Thank you very much, Erwin. And I want to extend a thank you to every single one of our panel members who joined us today, and every single one of our attendees who attended our webinar, submitted their questions, and spent the time with us to listen to us chat about the ISBT 128 standard. With that, I'm going to go ahead and transfer the reins of this webinar over to Robin here, and she's going to go ahead and do our final words. So Robin, without final ado.
So thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody. We just wanted to wrap it up with some announcements. Karen mentioned the annual surveys. Please, please submit those. They're very important for us to understand the breadth, depth, and scope of the usage of ISBT 128 standards. Also, we have an enterprise grant webinar coming up soon. That is a program to recognize and support initiatives around the world that help with aims to make MPHO, medical products of human origin, even safer out there in the world. We also just want to mention that we're going to be, a few of us are going to be at some upcoming conferences. So that would be ASFA, Himbana, and ISCT. And also, I just want to point out that we do, I can see from our queue that we do have some unanswered questions, and we will be putting those up at the end whenever we post the webinar. When it's ready to be posted, we will be answering those questions in full. So thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate that you were here, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you.